I'm John Buchanan, and what we're going to do in this video is we're going to work with an external synth and Varispeed to produce a kind of thickening approach to a production that we've got in progress. Before we go any further, let's just listen to the little sequence that we're going to be working with before we start seeing what Varispeed can do to add a kind of different kind of production layer to this mix. Okay, so I'm working with an external synthesizer, which I've set up using the external instrument plugin. And what that allows me to do is to tell Logic the destination of the instrument that I'm working with, and also to configure an audio input so we can actually hear the sound of this synthesizer, which is being triggered over USB. Now, what I want to do before I go any further is to record this original file. I'm going to basically just literally capture the audio of this sequence. And to do that, what I'm going to do is to set up a new audio track. I'm going to make sure that the audio inputs are set up to correspond to the inputs that I've plugged my synthesizer into, which is audio inputs 1 and 2. And then what I'm going to do is simply just record this straight out of here. Now, as it turns out, right now, at the moment, I can see that the Flex Edit option is on. I don't actually need that for this video. I'm going to turn that off right now, so I haven't applied any Flex Editing. I'm just going to close that down. So what we've got is a straightforward recording of this sequence, which is being triggered by the external instrument. Okay, fine. So I could mute the original, and now we've got the audio version. Okay, so now, what role might Varispeed play? Well, firstly, let's find out how we turn it on, and then we'll see exactly what it does. So Varispeed is an option that exists up here. What I need to do is to add it to my project. And the best way to do that is to control click anywhere up here in the toolbar. And what I'm going to do, sorry, the control bar on the toolbar, I always get those the wrong way around. Okay, what we want to do is to customize our control bar and display. I'm going to select that option. And what happens is that all of these extra things that I can bring to the control bar, see, got it right that time, I can add here. And Varispeed is an option that exists right here. And by doing that, what's going to happen is a new button is going to be added here. And also we can see that the display has changed in the middle. All right, so this is our Varispeed option. Now, the best way to think about Varispeed is to imagine that Logic was a big tape machine. If what I could do would be to slow down the speed at which the playback of my project was happening, effectively two things would happen at once. Firstly, everything would get slower, but also the pitch would drop, because effectively there's a direct correlation between speed and pitch when we play back from analog systems like that. And Varispeed allows us to do various things with this relationship between speed and pitch. So effectively, by turning this on, what I can do is to produce a percentage offset for my project. In other words, now that I've got an audio file, what we can do is to experiment with what happens with Varispeed. So I can see that there are 3 different modes. Firstly, I've got a speed only mode. So this is going to preserve the pitch of the sequence that I'm working with, but what it's going to allow me to do is to produce a percentage offset to the speed of playback. It's going to ever so slightly open up the front of this file, and then what I'm going to do is to press play. So there's our original sequence, but what I could do would be to say, okay, I'm going to increase the speed playback by 10%. Or by 25%. And what we're doing is we're changing the speed, but you can see that the pitch is preserved. By the way, sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Actually, in many ways, as a kind of playback, stretching, sort of elastic playback speed machine. Wow, what a sentence that was. Actually, Varispeed is really good, and it's particularly good if we go the other way as well. Let's take this down to, let's say, minus 15%. Again, still going to be the same speed, sorry, the same pitch, but the speed is going to change. So that is our speed-only algorithm. But I was talking about tape machines before and this kind of relationship between pitch and speed. Well, we're going to find that is available to us if we decide that what we want to do is to use the main Varispeed option, speed and pitch. So at minus 15%, this is going to create a correlation between 78 BPM minus 15%, both from a speed perspective and a pitch perspective. So it sort of stands to reason that if I was to increase this by 50%, we'd get an octave up. Okay, so what we've got is this relationship now. So those are the two main modes. Okay, so why am I showing you this with an external MIDI instrument? Well, what I'm interested in potentially doing is creating a kind of thick, sort of almost dusty, old synth approach to a kind of detuned sequence. I like the idea of creating multiple layers of this sequence which is being produced from this hardware synthesizer, but basically layering it up with some detune. And this is where Varispeed and MIDI can combine in quite interesting ways. Now there is a mode for that called Varispeed and MIDI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute this original recorded sequence. I'm going to unmute my Hydrosynth part, so effectively it's running live again. So what I'm then going to do is to create a new audio track. And what I want to do this time is I want to create a negative Varispeed amount of just 3%. Now what this is going to do is it's going to preserve the pitch of the original performance. In other words, the same MIDI notes are still going to be played back from the original Hydrosynth part, but the speed is going to be down a little bit. It's going to be down 3%. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to record this sequence too, and we're going to see what happens when I combine them both. So let's just record this sequence for a second time. But what I'm actually going to do is just label this track minus 3%. Okay, let's have a listen. Okay, so I've now got two audio recordings of this external MIDI instrument. One which was recorded with 0% offset, let's just label that track as well, and one which was recorded at minus 3. So if I take the Varispeed back to 0 for a moment, this part is effectively going to do exactly what it was doing before, but this one is now going to be detuned upwards because it was recorded slower. It's now going to come up, and we should be able to hear that little pitch offset if we just play this back by itself. Compared to the original, which sounds like this. So let's play them both back together. So now we've got this quite thick, detuned approach. Okay, well, let's take that on one further step. What I'm going to do is create another audio track, and this time what I'm going to do is to produce a Varispeed offset, which is up 2%. So effectively now we're going to be recording this too fast, which means that when we take Varispeed back to 0 again, this one will effectively play back flat. Again, quite a hard thing to say. Okay, I keep sort of twisting myself up in these little verbal tongue twisters. Okay, let's record it one more time. So what I'm going to do is to select this track here, hit record, and let's just capture this recording as well. So just allowing for that little bit of delay on the end as well. So again, what I'm going to do, put all of these in together. This one's at +2. I'm just going to label them so we can remember what's what. I'm going to take Varispeed back down to 0, and let's have a listen to that. So we've now got 2 separate thickening agents, if you like, making it sound like a recipe, for our original Hydrosynth sequence, which I'm just going to mute because we've got them all as audio now. Now, of course, it stands to reason that all 3 of these parts can be further Varispeeded. Varisped? What is the right word? So in other words, if I wanted to take all of this down, let's say 10%, that would be interesting. And of course, if I wanted to, I could capture that as an audio bounce at that Varispeed offset, bring it back in and take it back up. So effectively what I've got a chance to do is to constantly resample with this kind of pitch extra approach. Now, obviously, at the moment, we're just playing around with Varispeed, but now what I've got is this quite interesting, thick sounding synth line. And one thing that would be quite interesting to do would be to create a little bit of variation for these. So for example, we could take the second of these 2 recordings, which is our -3 offset, and we could pan it a little bit to the left. We could take the other one across to the right. One thing we could also do potentially would be to change a bit of filter shape on these so that rather than being as bright as the original signals, maybe they're just a little bit duller, so that they're obviously kind of playing second fiddle to this original part. I could copy that auto filter across to here as well. So suddenly we get a more muted detuned effect. With the other part sort of acting as the lead. So we've got this really nice kind of thick sounding part. And again, let's just put that in with a couple of other elements and just see how that sounds. Really interesting. And of course, what we could do, particularly with those kind of filtered versions that we are providing our sort of thickness, would be to kind of automate those parameters so that maybe we start with a really murky sort of pitch offset version of these parts, and then we make those parts more prominent. Also, it'd be really interesting to pass those particular versions of this sound into a reverb and have that kind of thickness be really spacey as well. So if what you want to do is to take any sound from any external synthesizer and maybe give it a new production trick that maybe makes it all a bit thicker and more weighty somehow, this is a really interesting way of working with this kind of Varispeed approach, making individual recordings and layering them together to produce completely new sounds for your productions.